Hello, welcome to this week's Qualoupe class, and I think my screen sharing is paused. No, it should be okay. Right, as I was saying, welcome to this week's Qualoupe class, and this week we're going to look at the instrument manager. It's just going to be a fairly simple look at how you'd set up your instrument records this week, and then next week's class we're going to go into more detail of how you can set up maintenance schedules for your instruments. So here's my instrument manager icon. I've conveniently placed it on my favorites tab, but you can also access it via administrator, and of course any other tabs you might have assigned it to. So the layout, again, you must be getting familiar with this now, similar sort of layout. So we'll click on New Record and we'll create a new instrument. So let's create, why am I using caps? pH meter 2. And I'm calling it pH meter 2 because I know there's already a pH meter 1 in my database. Okay, and the name isn't really significant, it's just something to help you identify this particular instrument. And you must also define a type. So if I click on the type list, you can see we've got preloaded a list of suggested types, you know, GCs, HPLCs, and in here we have pH meter. So select. So if I save my changes, it's now created my new record. Now, there's a certain amount of descriptive information that you might like to add into here. For example, we could look up the supplier. If I click on here, it looks up from your companies, your business units that you've created, where they have a type of supplier. So, Mettler looks like a suitable one. And manufacturer, it's the same sort of thing. If I click on this, it looks up from any customer record, any address records you've got in your system, which have got a type of manufacturer. Oh, there's Mettler again. Looks like we bought it directly from the manufacturer. Location, so I'll look that up. QC lab. That's a self-populating list. So in other words, if I put in lab 3 and saved it, in future if I click on this, lab 3 now appears on that list. So you can add your locations as you go along, and then they'll be available to pick from for subsequent records. Serial number, I don't know, MT123456. There's an instant serial number. Model lab pH meter pH001. Okay, so I mean I'm just making these spurious values up, but you get the idea. And you can say, oh, this is subject to a service contract, so you could tick that if you want to. I think I'll leave that unticked. Now, there's some other fields in here, which I'll come back to in a bit. Is component, parent instruments, and also total uses. We'll discuss that later. So I've now created my instrument record, and that's on at the simplest level all you need to do. So you've just created a record of your instrument. We can get slightly more complicated if we want to add components. So I'll illustrate this by creating a new record, and we'll call this one pH probe 1. And just for the sake of argument, I'll label that pH meter. Save changes. Now we could have filled in all these details as well, but I'm not going to. But what I am going to do is I'm going to tick to show that this is a component. You'll notice if this is unchecked, I've got the Instrument Components tab live, and I have the ability to add a component. If I tick Component, that tab disappears. And so if I go back to my previous record, which was pH meter 2, there it is, and add components, it looks up any other instrument records which have been flagged as a component which are not already attached to any other instrument record. So I'll just select phprobe 1, continue, save changes. So what we're saying is phmeter 2 has got phprobe 1 attached to it. So the idea of this is that you might have a selection of probes, and of course you can plug any probe into any compatible meter. So, you know, phprobe 1 might require cleaning, so you'd unplug it and stick it in some solution to clean it, and in the meantime you might plug in phprobe 4 or something like that. So it's just to allow you to build up a record of which components come together to form one instrument setup. So a meter plugged into a pH probe is a fairly simple model, but if you have something like an HPLC or a GC, you could have columns which are interchangeable, and some of those have got individual components, controllers and stuff, which you can swap round between different setups. So it's to keep a track of what's all together, even though it's a separate component with its own serial number, manufacturer, that sort of thing, and it might even have different maintenance schedules, which we'll come into in the next class. So it just allows you to associate the two together. So if I go and create another new record, and we'll create phprobe 2, pH meter is component, save changes. So if I go back to my pH meter 2, which is the new one I created. Oh, I thought I'd added. Well, never mind. I'll click on Add Component. We've got phprobe 2. I must have added phprobe 1 to the other one. I've lost track of what I've added it to. Let's have a look at both of these. Mysterious. Haha, right, okay. I've forgotten where I've added it now. I shall have a quick look at this. This will tell me where it's gone. It's attached to pH meter 2. It tells me in the probe record where it's attached. Load records, pH meter 2. I don't know why I wasn't showing. There it is. So pH meter 2 has got that probe attached. If I click on Add Component again, it shows me the components that are available. So I could delete that component, and it doesn't remove the record completely. I might have to reload that record. Oh, it's still showing us there. But if I go back to Add Components, I seem to have a bit of a lag on it deciding that it's disconnected or so. But the idea is, anyway, you can highlight it, delete it, and then add a different one in its place. See what happens if I add a different one in its place. I've got 2 now. Okay, so I'm not terribly sure what's happening there, but you get the idea anyway. You can, once you've added a component, it's not attached forever. You can take it off, add a different one, or it might be you have a pH meter where you can put 2 probes on it. Okay, so go back to loading my records. We've created a pH meter 2 record. We've created a pH probe record. So an instrument record can be a component, and if so, it can be attached to a parent record. If it's attached, it tells you where it's attached, and the parent record will tell you what it's got attached to it. Another thing we can do is, and this comes into the maintenance schedules and events. You see we've got tabs for those, which I'm going to cover in my next class. I'm trying not to put too much detail in each class as we go along. If I go to the Method Manager, I'll open that in a new tab. What you can do is you can associate instruments of a particular type to a method. So if I load my pH record, is. In here we have instrument type. I think in a previous class I mentioned where all this information comes from, but instrument type comes from the available instrument records. So if we looked at all our instrument records, we seem to have GCs and pHs. So if I go back to Manage Methods, click on Instrument Type, GCs and pH meters. So it's not looking up from the general lookup list, it's saying you have currently got some GC records and some pH meter records. So I'll highlight that, select. So what you're basically saying is when you run this method, it uses this type of instrument. And there is a field here, instrument increment. So it's how many uses of the instrument does one instance of the method take. So for example, keeping our pH analogy, if your measurement requires you to do a calibration and then 3 repeats, and then your result is the average of your 3 repeats, you might say, well, this is going to increment 4 uses every single time this method is run, or you might just say, no, that's 1 use. So in other words, when the method is on a sample and you enter a result for it, that's 1 use of the instrument. And in the instrument manager you can see we have a total number of uses. So as you use the method which references the instrument, the total number of uses will go up. So I will go into that in more detail in my next class. So this was just an overview of setting up the records to start off with. So thanks very much for watching. I'll be around afterwards if any of you have got any questions. And thanks again.